Before I was even in elementary school, I remember I loved my company. I loved myself. I thought it was amazing. I thought it was the best. And I knew that I was different from other people, but I liked that. I remember kind of looking at the other kids around me and thinking, you're all idiots. I hate you all. I know you all think that I'm strange, but you're the strange ones for thinking that I'm strange. And I was completely alone growing up, but I loved my own company and I thought I was the best and I was fine with that. And it wasn't until like kindergarten where I just remember I was sitting by myself. I was like put in the red zone. I was put in timeout and I was sitting by myself on the concrete, just kind of watching all the kids have fun. And I remember watching my classmates have friends and like scream and run around and climb things and have fun. And they just seemed so in the moment and so like kids. And I was like, why can't I have that? Why am I alone? Why am I by myself on the concrete? Because I remember the other kids who were put in timeout, they had their friends like waiting on the sidelines for them. I was the only one who didn't have anyone excited for me to get out of timeout. And I remember I was like, why is it like this? Why all of a sudden, why am I alone? Like, that doesn't seem right. I just remember thinking, yeah, why don't I have friends? They seemed so fun. What's wrong with me? So that's, when I started kind of I noticed that I was different and maybe it wasn't in a good way. And then in middle school, I remember I was homeschooled at this point, and we went to one of these like parks. And I would always hang out with the parents in our group because I hated kids and I thought they were idiots. And so once again, I'm just kind of sitting by myself, listening to the parents tell stories. And I was watching these kids climb this tree from afar. And I hated climbing. I hated nature. I hated everything. I thought it was so dangerous. But I remember I was watching them and they just seemed to be having so much fun again. They just were so careless. They were just friends. They were just climbing this tree and really enjoying the moment. And I was like, once again, why don't I have that? What am I doing? All these kids think I'm weird. All these parents think I'm weird for sitting next to them. Why don't I have friends? I would like to experience that. I want to be able to have fun climbing a tree. So I did go up to them, and I remember I tried to climb this tree, and everything I did was wrong. I remember whenever I would try to like implement myself in friend groups, people would always kind of be like, oh, and they would kind of scoot away until I was alone again. And because, I always thought I was amazing and the best and the best person ever. And so when I started trying to make friends, I was like, well, let me, if I'm the best person ever, I can make friends. And when I couldn't, that's when I was like, there has to be something wrong with me. Because if everyone else knows something about me that I don't, then like, what is my blind spot that like, the potential of something is always, to me, it always feels better than like the actual execution, because in my little imagination potential, I can be right about everything. If I never try to make friends, I can always tell myself, well, of course I can make friends if I tried. But if I actually try, I see that I can't. And so when I saw that I couldn't, that's when I was like, okay, what's wrong with me then? And so that's when I started in middle school trying to be what I thought everyone wanted, what I thought would get me friends. And honestly, I feel like it made it worse because I was not myself. And so I was this weird amalgamation of just things. And so that I feel like people have like a sixth sense for picking up on inauthenticity, at least when it comes to like being autistic. And so everyone thought I was even stranger when I was just like this weird robot trying to piece together the formula of making friends. And so then, of course, they left me alone. And once again, I was like, what's wrong with me? And so just growing up with that weird, like, I was like, I don't want to be alone. I want to be able to prove that someone out there will love me. And so that's when I really became obsessed with the idea of like finding my soulmate, because my parents, they loved me unconditionally, but they're my parents. They have to, that's just comes by default. But a stranger choosing to love you sounds amazing. This person who didn't know me at all, they just met me, and something about me was so alluring that they decided to spend the rest of our lives together, and we just understand each other, and they just have seen me grow up, and they know everything about me, and I loved that idea so much. But I couldn't even make friends, so I especially couldn't get a partner or anything. But so when I stopped being homeschooled and I went to public school my senior year of high school, I knew it was strange. I knew it was different. I knew I was the homeschooled kid that everyone thought was weird. And I just kind of accepted that, like, well, at this point, I've tried. I can't make friends. I just suck and I'm a loser, and I'll just have to deal with that for the rest of my life. So I didn't even really try to make friends, which was strange because I just would always be in my own little world. And I remember people actually did know me in my high school. I don't know if they were bullying me, but everyone was, in my mind, everyone was so nice to me. Because, I don't know, like, people liked me, but I was like, well, I don't want to burden them with me. So I just didn't do anything ever. And so, like, even though people liked me in my high school, I still just thought that no one would ever date me, right? And I never would hang out with friends outside of school, so I didn't really count them as friends. I was like, if our relationship only depends on us being in the same class together, that's not really a friendship. So I remember I just had accepted my life of being a loser. And that all changed when I had a crush on this guy who was in 3 of my classes. And he was the first person to ever tell me that, like, oh, you're so different, you're so special, you're so alluring, he was the first person who had ever taken an interest in me. And I was like, no, like, I'm weird, I'm different, people don't like me, I don't have any friends, everyone always figures out that they don't like me eventually. And he was like, no, I want to learn more about you, and so it was the first time that anyone had ever been interested in me, kind of ever. And I was very shocked by it. And so I ended up dating that guy for 3 years. And I really beat myself up for that relationship a lot because he had so many red flags in the beginning. And I saw the red flags in the beginning because, growing up autistic, I was like, there's something wrong with me. So I became obsessed with psychology, and I became obsessed with knowing, like, how to, win friends and influence people. And so I learned all the relationship advice and red flags. And so he was like a textbook, I think he saw those same things, and he was like, let me do all of those. So I would see them in the moment, but I would think, well, I just suck so much that what did I expect? Of course I'm going to get into an abusive relationship because who else would love me? No one. This is the only chance I have at love with this guy that sucks, but at least it's someone. And so 3 years later, I was, I probably about a year and a half in when he started very overtly cheating on me. That's when I kind of knew that, like, the relationship was over. We would never be able to revert back to that, like, beautiful honeymoon stage. But I still held on to it because I was like, well, this is the only chance I'm ever going to get at love, ever. No one else will ever, it's either this guy who sometimes is nice to me or being alone by myself again. And I absolutely had this fear that I was going to become the person that I was when I was 16 again, that everyone thought was weird and I was crazy and no one liked. At least when I had a boyfriend, he kind of taught me how to be normal. I tried so hard, my Instagram feed I made look normal again. And I would post normal things, and I would do normal things, like go on dates, and I had normal topics to talk about. Because when I would go to school, I would talk about anime and drawing, and no one liked that. But when I had a boyfriend, I could go to work, and I could be like, yeah, my boyfriend. And then someone else would be like, my boyfriend. And we'd be like, oh my God, boyfriends. And so nice to be able to have just a baseline thing to connect with everybody with. And so I was like, if I don't have a boyfriend, I'm gonna go back to being 16 again, where I'm that weird kid just talking about anime. And so I still was holding on to the relationship for way too long. And really towards the end of the relationship, at that 3-year mark, I actually did have, I wouldn't say a friend. He wanted to be my boyfriend, but he was still a voice of an alternative opinion. And so I remember I was kind of at the end of my relationship, and I really was over my boyfriend, and I wanted to break up with him, but I just was scared of what that meant. And I whenever I would talk to people about it, I hated it so much because people would always tell me, "You're so beautiful. You can go out tonight and get any guy that you want to date you." And I know I'm pretty. That's not the problem. The problem is I think my personality sucks. I feel like I'm this pretty packaging that, I'm so beautiful, and then once you actually get to know me, I like trap you, and you're like, oh, she's actually really weird. And so whenever people would reassure me with that, of like, you're amazing, you're the best, of course you'll find another boyfriend, this isn't the only guy, I was like, oh, no, you don't know that. I've already tried, It's like that friend thing again, where if I went over to that tree, I would be able to be friends with everybody if I just tried. It's like, this is our little alternative reality where I'm right about everything. But I've tried that, and in theory, sure, but in reality, no one actually likes me. But strangely, as an adult, people do. I don't know what changed. I feel like I've been the same the whole time, but all of a sudden, when I became an adult, people thought I was interesting. But so I hated that advice so much, and it actually made me be stuck in the relationship more, because I was like, once again, these people don't know me. These people are like, the only thing that I can hold on to leave this relationship is that I'll find someone else. But I won't. So that's why I'll stay in this one. And so it wasn't until one day that I just woke up and I was like, you know what? If I am going to be alone forever, then that's actually a great thing. Because I'll be able to be alone with me. I won't have to deal with anyone else. I won't have to pretend to date someone. I won't have to be anything else that anyone else wants me to be. If I can be alone by myself, then I get to do whatever I want until the day I die. Sounding like dying alone sounds amazing, because that means that I got to be my most authentic self in the way that I wanted to until the day I died. And I didn't have to reassure anyone else about who I was. And so just one day I woke up and I just was like, I'm so sick of this guy. I can't believe that he's treating me like this. And I still was like, well, I still don't think I'm perfect. I don't think I kind of was like, I still don't deserve to have him. I still think I'm selfish for everything. But if I'm selfish, then I'm selfish. And maybe if I'm selfish, maybe I don't want anyone else to deal with me. And so I'll break up with him so that way I can be selfish by myself. And it's not the best thought process, but I was like, you know what? If I always think that I'm this bad person, I'm always trying to change so that way people like me more. I'm so sick of that. Let's just accept that I'm a bad person, I guess. And I'll just be selfish. And so if I'm selfish, then I break up with him. And then I'll be alone. But then I'm alone. And I like myself. And I just was like, well, it feels like I'm back to that before elementary school version of myself again. I very much feel like a kid. I broke up with him about 1.5 years ago. And sometimes I worry I'll never be over it. Sometimes I feel like I'm gonna die and always just be like, but what was that? But yeah, of course I'm not gonna be over it. It was something that happened in my life in general. And I've never gotten over anything ever in my life, ever. And I always think about everything all the time. And I've just accepted that, well, I guess I'll just always think about what if or why or how or what could have for the rest of my life. But at least I don't have to deal with it actively anymore. At least I can be my own person by myself and overthink everything by myself. But anyway, so I've been thinking about that a lot because I see a lot of relationship advice. And a lot of it is, well, I don't even really see it relationship advice. I always think about what I wish not what I could have heard, because if somebody told me, you're gonna die alone, yay! I would have been like, what's wrong with you? But I wish somehow I could, I don't know, when I woke up one day and I was just excited to die alone, it felt like, honestly, I had taken a future version of myself who was 40 and amazing and great. I already had learned the lessons, and so it just felt like somehow I had taken those lessons that I learned in the future and I just kind of placed them onto myself in the past. That's why it was so sudden that just one day I woke up and I was like, I'm gonna die alone! And so I just always think about, I never heard anybody else say that though. And so sometimes when I make these videos, I hope that somehow they inspire people, because I just am sick of hearing the same mindset over and over again of you're gonna find, because still to this day, I tell people I'm excited to die alone. And people say, don't say that, you're gonna find someone. And I'm like, that's not the point. I don't want to find anybody. The goal is to die alone. So I always, whenever I get those comments, I'm like, I want this somehow. I try to make my account, I always try to say something that I haven't heard before. And so sometimes I'm like, let me do some mindset shifts where I just show people what it's like. Because I always hate those therapist videos that try to do the mindset shift. But once again, we're talking in theory, and so it's just annoying to be told how to think the right way. But no one actually thinks like that. And so sometimes I feel like I have this responsibility, because sometimes I do think differently than other people. And I know I do. And so I'm just like, well, at least it's not in theory. At least I am living it. At least I have some sort of example. I feel like that's a better way than just saying, try to think like this. Be excited to die alone. It's like, you're just, nah. But I prefer to see someone who actually lives it and is like, well, if I die alone, then great.